Ambassador Jinho walked through the crystal corridors of the Galactic Council station, his polished black shoes clicking against the translucent floor. Above him, the artificial aurora painted swirling colors across the dome's ceiling, while below, the vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly. He had made this walk 47 times in the past 2 years, and each time felt heavier than the last. The ornate chamber doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the circular amphitheater where representatives from 63 species gathered to discuss galactic affairs. Jinho's designated seat sat in the lower tier, a subtle reminder of humanity's junior status in this ancient assembly. He nodded politely to the Crystallian ambassador, whose body sparkled like living diamond, and took his place beside his aide, Mina. Mina was already reviewing her tablet, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed shipping routes, colony reports, and casualty lists. Her usually bright expression was clouded with worry as she whispered updates about the latest attacks on human settlements. Jinho listened without changing his diplomatic smile, even as the numbers grew worse each week. The session began when Speaker Thane materialized on the central platform, his energy form shifting between colors as he called the assembly to order. The ancient being had presided over the council for 3 centuries, and his voice carried the weight of cosmic authority as he announced the day's agenda. Today we address concerns regarding Human Federation activities in Sectors 7 through 12, Thane intoned, his form flickering between blue and silver. The Valkyrian delegate rose immediately, his forearms spreading wide in a gesture of theatrical concern. His blue skin seemed to shimmer under the chamber's lights, and his quartet of eyes fixed on Jinho with unmistakable condescension. The translator collar around his neck hummed to life, converting his native clicks and whistles into perfect standard galactic. Honored Speaker, the Valkyrian Republic brings serious concerns about human expansion, he began, his mechanical voice echoing through the chamber. In the past 6 months alone, human colonies have established 17 unauthorized settlements, created 14 new trade routes without proper permits, and initiated terraforming on 6 worlds without environmental impact studies. Murmurs rippled through the assembly as other delegates nodded in agreement. The Valkyrian continued, warming to his subject with obvious pleasure. The human species demonstrates a concerning lack of patience and proper procedure. They rush forward, like children, grabbing what they want without consideration for established galactic law. Perhaps it would benefit them to observe how elder species conduct themselves with proper dignity and restraint. The Thylorian representative slithered, forward on his serpentine lower body, his scales shifting from deep green to angry red as he spoke. His voice was a silk-smooth hiss that somehow managed to sound more insulting than the Valkyrian's mechanical tone. Indeed, the pattern is disturbing. Humans approach everything with such primitive urgency, violence, expansion, resource extraction. They cannot seem to grasp that true civilization requires contemplation and careful consideration. We have been managing galactic affairs for millennia, while humans were still discovering fire. Laughter rippled through sections of the assembly, though Jinho noticed that some of the newer species remained silent. The Corvan delegate, whose people had only joined the council 50 years ago, shifted uncomfortably in her environmental suit. Behind Jinho, Mina's jaw tightened as she scrolled through her reports. The irony was bitter. While these elder species lectured about patience and proper procedure, human civilians were dying. Just yesterday, the cargo vessel Unity's Dream had been attacked near the neutral zone. 15 crew members dead, including Captain Yeon's daughter, who had been traveling to her new assignment on Kepler Station. The attacks weren't random. Mina's intelligence analysis showed clear patterns. The pirates knew human shipping schedules, targeted vessels carrying specific cargo, and always managed to disappear before Council peacekeeping forces arrived. More disturbing were the energy signatures detected at attack sites, signatures that matched Valkyrian military vessels. Every request for enhanced protection had been met with committee reviews, environmental assessments, and bureaucratic delays that stretched for months. Meanwhile, human families on frontier worlds lived in constant fear. their children afraid to play outside their dome settlements. The Arcturian delegate, a massive creature whose rocky exterior glowed with internal heat, added his voice to the criticism. The Human Federation's aggressive posture threatens regional stability. Their military buildup in contested systems suggests expansionist intentions that concern many council members. Jinho's knuckles whitened slightly as he gripped the armrests of his chair, but his expression remained perfectly diplomatic. He had spent years mastering this facade, learning to smile while listening to veiled threats and condescending lectures. The Human Federation had taught its diplomats well: patience, respect, cultural sensitivity. When Speaker Thane called upon him to respond, Jinho rose slowly and bowed with practiced grace toward each section of the assembly. His voice was calm and measured, carrying just the right note of humble gratitude. The Human Federation deeply appreciates the wisdom and guidance of this honored assembly. We acknowledge the concerns raised by our esteemed colleagues and will carefully consider how we might better align our actions with established galactic customs. As he sat down, Mina leaned close and whispered urgently, "Ambassador, Priority 1 message just came in. The Harmony Station convoy was hit 3 hours ago. 15 dead, including civilians. The survivors report seeing Valkyrian ship signatures, fleeing the scene." Jinho nodded once, his diplomatic smile never wavering even as something cold settled in his chest. "Schedule another emergency session for next week. We'll present our evidence and request immediate investigation." Mina's expression was grim. "Sir, this is the 4th time we've requested investigation of Valkyrian involvement. The committee is still reviewing our previous submissions." "Then, we'll try again," Jinho replied softly, though his eyes had grown distant. "We'll be patient. We'll follow proper procedures. We'll trust in the wisdom of our elder species." But as the session continued around him, with delegate after delegate lecturing humanity about restraint and proper behavior, Jinho found himself thinking about the families on Harmony Station who would never see their loved ones again. He thought about the children on frontier worlds who asked their parents why the nice aliens in the pretty building couldn't make the bad men stop hurting people. Patience, he reflected, was supposed to be a virtue. But watching good people die, while bureaucrats debated proper procedure, was beginning to feel less like virtue and more like complicity. The session ended with the usual platitudes about cooperation and understanding. As delegates filed out to attend their cultural exchanges and diplomatic receptions, Jinho remained seated, staring at the holographic display that showed human colonies scattered across the galaxy like points of light in an increasingly hostile darkness. "Schedule the meeting," he said finally. "We'll try again." The emergency alert pierced through the council station's usual calm at 0347 Galactic Standard Time. Jinho jolted awake in his diplomatic quarters, the red warning lights casting harsh shadows across his small cabin. His communication device was already buzzing with incoming messages from Earth, each one more urgent than the last. Mina burst through his door without knocking, her usually neat appearance disheveled, and her eyes wide with shock. "Ambassador, you need to see this now," she said, her voice trembling as she activated the holographic display. The footage was grainy, captured by Kepler Station's external security cameras just before they were destroyed. The peaceful mining station hung in space like a delicate flower, its rotating habitat rings glowing with warm light from thousands of windows where families lived and worked. Children could be seen playing in the observation decks, their laughter almost audible through the silent recording. Then the ships appeared. 3 Valkyrian destroyers materialized from hyperspace, their distinctive blue hulls and triple-pronged design unmistakable even in the poor quality recording. The lead vessel launched a spread of plasma torpedoes without warning, without attempting communication, without giving the civilians any chance to evacuate. Jinho watched in horror as the habitat rings exploded in brilliant flashes of fire and venting atmosphere. Tiny figures, people, were sucked into the vacuum of space, their lives snuffed out in seconds. The mining platforms collapsed like broken toys, and the central core of the station split apart in a cascade of debris and escaping air. The Valkyrian ships lingered only long enough to ensure complete destruction, then vanished back into hyperspace, leaving nothing but wreckage and the scattered remains of 200 human lives. The rescue ships found no survivors, Mina whispered, her hands shaking as she switched off the display. No one made it to the escape pods. They didn't even try to run. The attack was so sudden, so overwhelming. 3 hours later, every delegate in the Galactic Council had received copies of the footage along with detailed forensic analysis, proving beyond doubt that Valkyrian weapons had been used. The emergency session convened with unusual speed, the great chamber buzzing with whispered conversations and nervous energy. Speaker Thane materialized on the central platform, his energy form flickering more erratically than usual, a sign of distress among his species. The ancient being had presided over the council through wars, famines, and plagues, but even he seemed shaken by the deliberate massacre of civilians. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice carrying across the chamber with somber weight. "We gather today to address a tragedy that has shocked us all. The destruction of Kepler Station represents a loss of innocent life that cannot be ignored." The Valkyrian delegate rose with his usual theatrical flair, but Jinho noticed something different in his posture, a subtle tension that suggested he knew this time would be different. The blue-skinned alien's 4 eyes swept the chamber before settling on the human delegation with what could only be described as contempt. "The Valkyrian Republic categorically denies any involvement in this unfortunate incident," he declared, his mechanical translator voice echoing off the crystal walls. "Our government has launched a full investigation and will cooperate with all legitimate inquiries." A murmur of approval rippled through portions of the assembly, but Jinho noticed that several species remained silent. The younger civilizations, those who had joined the council within the past century, watched the proceedings with growing unease. The Valkyrian continued, his tone shifting to one of barely concealed mockery. "However, we must address the fundamental issue at hand. If human settlers insist on establishing colonies in dangerous, contested regions of space, they must accept the natural consequences of their choices. Pirates and raiders operate throughout the galaxy. This is simply the price of expansion." Jinho felt something snap inside his chest. The words echoed in his mind, natural consequences, price of expansion, as if the deaths of children were simply acceptable losses in some cosmic business transaction. "Furthermore," the Valkyrian delegate added with a dismissive wave of one of his 4 hands, "the footage presented is inconclusive at best. Ship signatures can be falsified, and desperate humans might fabricate evidence to gain sympathy and support for their aggressive expansion policies." The Thylorian representative nodded sagely, his serpentine form coiling with satisfaction. "Indeed, we must not allow emotion to cloud our judgment. The proper procedures must be followed. Investigations conducted with appropriate thoroughness, Speaker." Thane's energy form shifted to deep blue, the color of contemplation among his species. "These incidents require careful examination and thorough investigation. We cannot rush to judgment based on preliminary evidence, no matter how compelling it may appear." Jinho's hands gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly that his knuckles went white. Beside him, Mina watched her superior's face with growing alarm as she saw the diplomatic mask beginning to crack. A muscle in his jaw twitched almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign of the fury building inside him. "The Council suggests," Speaker Thane continued in his ancient, measured tone, "that humanity demonstrate greater patience in these matters. Learn from species who have mastered the art of peaceful coexistence through millennia of careful diplomacy." The word patience hung in the air like a physical thing, and suddenly the great chamber fell completely silent. Every delegate, every aide, every translator seemed to hold their breath as they waited for the human response. Jinho rose from his seat with deliberate slowness, his movements controlled but somehow more dangerous than any dramatic gesture could have been. For a long moment he simply stood there in the silence, and every being in the chamber could feel something fundamental shifting in the balance of power. When he spoke, his voice was perfectly calm, perfectly controlled, perfectly reasonable, but there was something underneath it, something cold and final that made even the ancient Speaker Thane's energy form flicker with uncertainty. "Thank you for your guidance, honored Speaker," Jinho said, each word precise and measured. "I believe Humanity has learned everything it needs to know about patience. He began gathering his papers with the same deliberate precision he had shown for 2 years of diplomatic sessions, but now the action carried a different weight. Mina scrambled to collect her own materials, her eyes wide as she realized what was happening. The Human Federation formally withdraws from these proceedings, Jinho announced, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, despite its conversational tone. A shocked silence followed his words. In 3 centuries of council operation, no species had ever walked out of an emergency session. The very concept was unthinkable. It violated every principle of galactic diplomacy. As Jinho and Mina walked toward the great doors that led out of the chamber, their footsteps echoing in the stunned quiet, the Valkyrian delegate couldn't resist one final insult. His mechanical voice called out across the chamber with undisguised mockery, "Running away, Ambassador. How very human. I suppose when faced with real challenges, your species shows its true nature." Jinho paused at the doorway without turning. Around, the great crystal doors stood open before him, leading to corridors that would take him back to his ship, back to Earth, back to people who understood that some things were worth fighting for. "No," he said quietly, his voice somehow carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "We're going home to discuss alternative approaches to problem solving." As the doors closed behind them with a soft whisper of moving air, Mina finally found her voice. "Sir, what happens now?" Jinho's diplomatic smile was gone, replaced by something far more honest and infinitely more dangerous. "Now, Mina, they're going to learn what happens when humans stop being patient." Behind them, the council chamber erupted in confused chatter as delegates tried to understand what had just occurred. But deep in the corridors of the station, as Jinho walked toward his ship with steady, purposeful steps, the galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest strength had never been their patience. It had been their restraint. Commander Hyun was reviewing patrol reports in his quarters when the sealed message arrived. The quantum-encrypted transmission required his personal biometric key, retinal scan, and voice authorization before revealing its contents. As the holographic text materialized in the air before him, his expression changed from curiosity to grim satisfaction. The message was deceptively simple. "Execute Protocol 7. All assets are now active. Authorization. Phoenix Rising. God help us all." Hyun had been waiting 2 years for these orders. He immediately activated his ship's internal communication system, his voice echoing through every corridor of the massive battlecruiser UES Determination. "All hands, this is the commander. Prepare for combat operations. This is not a drill. Department heads report to the bridge in 10 minutes. The ship's transformation was immediate and spectacular. What had appeared to be a standard exploration vessel suddenly revealed its true nature. Hull plates slid away to expose rows of missile launchers. The innocent-looking cargo pods split open like mechanical flowers, revealing particle beam cannons that could punch through a moon. The ship's gentle blue running lights shifted to military red, and the entire vessel seemed to grow larger as hidden armor plating extended from internal compartments. Lieutenant Kwan, Hyun's tactical officer, pulled up a holographic display, showing the ship's new configuration. "Sir, all weapons systems are online. Stealth generators are charging. The cloak should be operational in 15 minutes. Across human space, similar scenes were playing out on dozens of ships, stations, and colonies. The message had reached every human commander simultaneously, triggering a coordinated response that had been planned for years. Captain Yuna stood on the bridge of her merchant vessel near the Thylorian border, watching her crew work with practiced efficiency. For 2 years they had played their roles perfectly. Simple traders carrying basic supplies between colonies. They had smiled and nodded when Thylorian patrols boarded for inspections, offering hospitality and maintaining detailed logs of innocent cargo manifests. "Dropping the masquerade feels good," she told her first officer, Lieutenant Seung, as false walls throughout the ship retracted with mechanical precision. The cargo bay, which had appeared to contain farming equipment and medical supplies, now revealed rows of quantum torpedoes and advanced targeting computers. Her communications officer, Ensign Tae, looked up from his console with excitement. "Captain, I'm detecting similar transformations throughout the sector. The mining station at Kepler 7 just revealed a sensor array that makes our military satellites look like toys. The transformation was breathtaking to watch. Asteroid mining platforms that had operated for years suddenly sprouted defensive turrets and long-range communication dishes. Their massive drilling equipment repositioned itself, revealing that the ore processors were actually mobile weapon platforms, capable of launching devastating attacks against capital ships. Research stations scattered throughout human space activated systems that had been carefully disguised as scientific equipment. Deep space telescopes turned out to be military-grade, targeting scanners. Atmospheric processors became shield generators. Even the humble hydroponics bays on frontier colonies revealed hidden manufacturing capabilities capable of producing advanced weaponry and combat armor. The Valkyrian High. Command noticed the increased activity within hours, but their interpretation was exactly what humanity had hoped for. General Vextar, the blue-skinned military leader who had personally ordered the Kepler Station massacre, reviewed the intelligence reports with amusement. "Look at them scurrying around like frightened insects," he laughed, his four arms gesturing dismissively at the holographic displays showing human ship movements. "They're reinforcing their colonies, probably building more of those pathetic defensive satellites." His aide, Colonel Mordan, seemed less certain. "General, the energy signatures are unusually strong. Some of these installations are drawing power levels consistent with military-grade systems." Vextar's translator collar hummed as he chittered, with derision. "Humans always over-engineer everything. They're probably installing industrial replicators and thinking it makes them strong. Let them waste their resources on defensive measures. It will make our final assault even easier." What the Valkyrians couldn't detect were the ships that simply weren't there. Human stealth technology had advanced far beyond anything the galaxy had seen, using principles of physics that bent light and sensor readings in ways that made scanning equipment report empty space where massive fleets actually lurked. The UES Phantom drifted silent and invisible just outside Valkyrian sensor range, its crew of 300 monitoring enemy communications while remaining completely undetectable. Captain Jiho watched the displays showing dozens of similar vessels, all positioned at strategic points throughout enemy territory. "Their patrols pass within a kilometer of us every day," his science officer whispered in amazement. "They have no idea we're here." Meanwhile, on Earth, President Deho stood before the Human Federation Council in the Great Assembly Hall beneath Geneva. The chamber was packed with representatives from every human colony, their faces reflecting the same grim determination that had carried humanity to the stars. "My fellow humans," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space, "for 2 years we have tried patience. We have followed proper procedures. We have trusted in diplomacy and the wisdom of elder species." The holographic displays around the chamber showed images from Kepler Station, from the freight convoys, from all the attacks that had been dismissed as acceptable losses by the Galactic Council. We buried our children while bureaucrats debated. Proper protocol. We watched our colonies burn while aliens lectured us about restraint. We begged for justice while our enemies laughed at our weakness. President Deho's expression hardened as he continued. "The diplomatic phase has concluded. We tried their way and our people died for it. Now we try our way." The vote was called immediately. Every hand in the chamber rose in unanimous agreement. There was no debate, no discussion, no hesitation. Humanity had made its choice. Within hours, the orders went out through quantum communication networks that the aliens had never suspected existed. From the furthest frontier colony to the deepest space exploration vessel, every human received the same message. The time for patience was over. In the depths of space, invisible fleets began moving toward their targets, on mining stations disguised. As civilian operations, weapons systems came online. In research facilities that had appeared harmless, military planners activated war rooms that had been hidden for years. The galaxy was about to learn that when humans spoke of patience, they weren't talking about passive waiting. They had been preparing, planning, positioning themselves for this moment when diplomacy would finally fail, and now that moment had arrived. Commander Hyun looked out at the stars through his bridge viewports, knowing that dozens of similar ships were doing the same thing throughout human space. Soon those same stars would witness something the galaxy had never seen before: humanity unleashed. "All stations report ready, Commander," his tactical officer announced. Hyun nodded slowly. "Then let's remind them why Earth creatures learned to hunt in packs." The quiet before the storm was ending. What came next would reshape the galaxy forever. Admiral Krental commanded the pride of the Valkyrian fleet from the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominance. The massive dreadnought stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its blue-tinted hull bristling with plasma cannons and torpedo launchers. Behind him, 12 heavy cruisers and 30 escort vessels formed the most powerful battle group in Valkyrian space. They had been investigating strange energy readings near the Proxima system when his sensors detected something unusual floating in the void. A single communication buoy, clearly of human design, drifted silently among the asteroids like a message in a bottle. "Retrieve that device," Krental ordered, his forearms working the command console with practiced ease. "I want to know what the humans are trying to tell us." Lieutenant Morseth, his tactical officer, maneuvered the ship's mechanical arms to collect the small cylinder. As it was brought aboard, Krental felt a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Humans were always so dramatic with their gestures. The message was decoded within minutes, its simple text appearing on the main display. In perfect Valkyrian script, "You should have listened." Krental's 4 eyes narrowed as he read the words. The arrogance of these primitive creatures never ceased to amaze him. Here he was, commanding enough firepower to reduce entire planets to rubble, and they dared to threaten him with cryptic "Messages, sir," his sensor operator called out, her voice suddenly tense. "I'm detecting massive gravitational distortions throughout the system. Something big is happening to space-time itself." Before Krental could respond, reality seemed to tear apart around them. Space itself rippled like water, and where empty, vacuum had existed seconds before. Human warships simply materialized into existence, not emerging from hyperspace with the familiar flash of displaced energy, but becoming visible as if someone had suddenly turned off an invisibility field that covered half the system. The Eternal Dominance found itself surrounded by vessels that defied every principle of military engineering. Human ships appeared above, below, and on all sides, their sleek black hulls reflecting starlight like polished obsidian. Each vessel was smaller than his dreadnought, but there were dozens of them, and their weapons were already charging with ominous blue energy. "Battle stations," Krental shouted. But even as the words left his mouth, he realized something was terribly wrong. His ship's systems were flickering, control panels going dark one by one, as some kind of electromagnetic pulse washed over the fleet. The lead human vessel, a graceful destroyer that moved like a living creature, broadcast a message on all frequencies. The voice was calm, professional, almost polite in its deadly certainty. "Valkyrian vessels, this is Commander Hyun of the Human Federation Navy. You are surrounded and outgunned. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Any attempt to fight will be met with overwhelming force." Krental's pride flared as he reached for the communications array, determined to show these upstart humans the fury of Valkyrian military might, but his hands found only dead controls. Every system on his ship was shutting down in cascade failure, overwhelmed by technology he couldn't begin to understand. Through the bridge windows, he watched human fighters sweep through his formation, with impossible precision. The small craft moved like schools of fish, coordinating their attacks with perfect timing. They didn't fire to destroy. Instead, they targeted specific systems with surgical accuracy, disabling engines, weapons, and communication arrays while leaving life support intact. One of his escort vessels tried to break formation and run, its engines flaring to maximum power. 3 human fighters intercepted it within seconds, their energy beams slicing through the ship's propulsion systems like a hot knife through ice. The vessel went dark and began drifting helplessly, its crew alive but completely helpless. "Sir, we're being boarded," Lieutenant Morseth reported, her voice barely a whisper. "Human soldiers are cutting through our hull in 12 different locations." The boarding was unlike anything in Krental's military experience. The humans didn't blast their way through airlocks or fight pitched battles in the corridors. Instead, they moved through his ship like ghosts, appearing in critical locations with equipment that seemed almost magical in its advanced capabilities. Within an hour, every Valkyrian vessel in the system had been captured intact, their crews imprisoned but unharmed. Krental found himself sitting in his own brig, staring through energy bars at human soldiers who treated their prisoners with professional courtesy. But this was just the beginning. Across Valkyrian space, the same scene. Repeated with clockwork precision, battle fleets that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries simply vanished from sensor screens. Military bases that had stood unconquered for decades went silent, their distress calls cutting off mid-transmission. The Draknor system, home to the Valkyrian Fleet Academy, defended by orbital platforms and 3 full battle groups, lasted exactly 14 minutes. Human forces appeared without warning, disabled every defensive system simultaneously, and captured the entire facility without a single casualty on either side. Commander Hyun coordinated the massive operation from his flagship, watching holographic displays that showed the systematic dismantling of an entire military empire. Red dots representing Valkyrian forces blinked out one by one, replaced by blue markers indicating human control. "Status report," he requested, his voice calm despite the magnitude of what they were accomplishing. Lieutenant Somin pulled up the tactical overview. "Operation Phoenix is proceeding ahead of schedule, sir. We've captured or disabled 87% of Valkyrian military assets. Casualties are minimal on both sides, mostly injuries from soldiers who resisted capture." Hyun nodded approvingly. "Maintain the pattern. Disable, capture, secure. We're not here to commit genocide. We're here to end a threat." The Thylorian Empire, watching their allies' complete destruction with growing horror, sent desperate diplomatic messages offering immediate neutrality. Their serpentine diplomats, who had mocked human patience just days before, now begged for mercy, with voices shaking with terror. The human response was swift and simple. Noted. Maintain current positions and await further instructions. Other species throughout the galaxy received similar messages as human forces revealed themselves in systems where no one had suspected their presence. Mining operations that had appeared civilian suddenly bristled with weapons. Trading posts became military command centers. Even simple agricultural colonies revealed defensive systems that could repel invasion fleets. The Corvan Republic, whose delegates had remained silent during the Council's dismissal of human concerns, received a personal message from President Daiho himself. The Corvan people showed wisdom in staying neutral during recent events. Continue this course, and you will find humanity a generous neighbor. Within 72 hours, the Valkyrian Empire's military had simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not scattered, but systematically captured and neutralized by forces that had been invisible until the moment they struck. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity demonstrated that their patience hadn't been weakness, it had been preparation time. While other species had debated and delayed, humans had been positioning assets, gathering intelligence and preparing for the day when diplomacy would finally fail. Commander Hyun stood on his bridge, looking out at stars that now fell under human protection. The operation had been flawless, but he felt no joy in the victory. Too many innocent people had died while the galaxy's leaders played politics. "Sir," Lieutenant Somin reported, "we're receiving surrender offers from 17 different systems. They want to negotiate terms." Hyun's expression was grim but satisfied. "Tell them we'll discuss terms once they've released all human prisoners and ceased all hostile activities. And remind them, we tried asking nicely first." The storm had passed, leaving the galaxy fundamentally changed. The age of human patience was over, replaced by something far more dangerous: human competence backed by unlimited determination. Those who had dismissed humanity as young and weak were learning a hard lesson about the difference between civilization and the capacity for violence. Humans could be both, and that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. 6 months after the Valkyrian Empire's military had vanished in 72 hours, Ambassador Jinho walked through the same crystal corridors of the Galactic Council station. But everything had changed. Where once alien delegates had barely acknowledged his presence, now they stepped aside with respectful nods. Security guards who had previously ignored him now stood straighter when he passed. The great chamber doors opened with their familiar soft hiss, revealing the circular amphitheater where galactic politics played out. But the seating arrangement was different now. Humanity's section had been moved to the upper tier, a subtle but unmistakable acknowledgement of their new status in the galactic hierarchy. As Jinho entered, conversations died throughout the chamber. Hundreds of alien eyes tracked his movement. As he made his way to his seat, where Mina was already waiting with her usual collection of reports and diplomatic documents, she looked up at him with a mixture of pride and concern. "The Corvan delegation wants to finalize the Mutual Defense Treaty today," she whispered. "The Altarians are requesting human peacekeepers for their border dispute with the Zenithians, and the Crystallian ambassador specifically asked to speak with you about establishing a joint research station." Jinho nodded, settling into his chair as Speaker Thane materialized on the central platform. The ancient energy being's form flickered more than usual, a sign of nervousness that hadn't been present in their previous encounters. "Honored delegates," Thane began, his voice carrying across the chamber with less authority than before, "we gather today to address the new realities of galactic security and cooperation." The Valkyrian delegation occupied just 3 seats now, compared to the dozens they had filled before. Their representatives were pale and subdued, speaking in whispers and avoiding eye contact with the human section. Their mighty empire had been reduced to 7 agricultural worlds, all operating under human protection and oversight. The war crimes trials on Earth had concluded just last week, with former General Vextar and his command staff convicted of genocide, piracy, and attacks on civilian targets. They would spend the rest of their lives in human prisons, serving as a reminder that actions had consequences. The Council recognizes the efficiency of human conflict resolution, Speaker, Thane continued, his energy form shifting to deep purple, a color that indicated discomfort among his species. "Perhaps we can return to productive diplomatic discussions." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly, but it was different from the old, dismissive sounds. This was respectful, almost eager. Every species present had witnessed what happened when humanity stopped being patient, and none wanted to experience it firsthand. Jinho rose from his seat with the same calm composure he had always displayed, but now the entire chamber fell silent to hear his words. There was no condescension in the watching eyes, no dismissive chittering or scale shifting that indicated boredom. Instead, there was careful attention and something that looked remarkably like respect. "The Human Federation has always preferred diplomatic solutions," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "We find violence distasteful and resort to it only when absolutely necessary." The Thylorian delegate, his serpentine form coiled tightly in his environmental suit, raised one scaled hand. His voice was tentative, almost fearful as he spoke. "Ambassador Jinho, if I may ask, have humans learned patience? Do you still value the careful deliberation that has guided galactic civilization for millennia?" A soft chuckle escaped from the human section, not mocking but genuinely amused. Jinho's smile was warm and genuine, but it carried a weight that made even the most powerful delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Oh yes, honored delegate. We've learned that patience is indeed a wonderful virtue. We've also learned that there comes a time when patience becomes complicity with evil." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "For 2 years we watched our people die while bureaucrats debated proper procedure. We buried children while committees discussed appropriate responses. We learned patience, all right. We learned exactly how far it could be pushed before it became moral cowardice." The chamber was absolutely silent now, every being hanging on his words. Even the usual background hum of translation devices seemed muted. Jinho opened his diplomatic folder, revealing thick stacks of documents that Mina had prepared over the past months. Trade agreements, defense pacts, technology sharing treaties, and cultural exchange programs, all waiting for signatures from species who had once dismissed humanity as primitive. "Now shall we discuss the new defensive pacts? I believe several species have expressed interest in mutual protection agreements. The Response was immediate and overwhelming. The Corvan delegate practically leaped from her environmental suit, waving multiple appendages in eager agreement. The Altarian representative activated his translation matrix so quickly that sparks flew from the device. Even the proud Crystallians, whose diamond-hard bodies had never shown emotion before, somehow managed to convey enthusiasm. The voting was remarkably swift and unanimous. Every proposal passed without debate, without committee review, without the endless delays that had once characterized council decisions. Species that had spent centuries arguing over trade route regulations now approved massive defense treaties. In minutes, as the session concluded, delegates from dozens of worlds approached the human section, each hoping to secure private meetings, favorable trade deals, or simply to ensure they remained on humanity's good side. The Zenithian ambassador, whose people had once called humans crude warmongers, now requested human military advisors to help modernize their defense forces. Mina gathered the paperwork with practiced efficiency, but Jinho could see the questions in her eyes. As they walked toward the exit, she finally voiced what had been bothering her. "Sir, was this outcome what you hoped for when you walked out 6 months ago?" Jinho considered the question carefully as they moved through corridors, where alien security guards now saluted them with genuine respect. Through the station's vast windows, he could see human patrol ships moving in formation, with vessels from a dozen different species, protecting trade routes that had been plagued by pirates for decades. Diplomacy works best when everyone understands. The alternatives, Mina. For too long, other species saw our diplomacy as weakness because they had never seen our strength. Now they understand the full picture. A Corvan merchant vessel passed by the windows, escorted by 2 human destroyers and a Crystallian defense cruiser. Its cargo holds were full of rare minerals bound for human colonies, part of a trade agreement. That benefited both species while ensuring the safety of civilian shipping. "You see," Jinho continued, watching the peaceful convoy, "they thought our patience meant we were helpless. They mistook our preference for talking as inability to fight. They assumed that because we chose diplomacy, we had no other options." Mina nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her expression. "But we always had other options." "Exactly. And now that they know about those options, suddenly diplomacy seems much more attractive to everyone involved." The space around the council station buzzed with activity as ships from dozens of worlds came and went under human protection. Trade flourished, research stations operated safely, and civilian vessels traveled routes that had been death traps just months before. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about humanity that would reshape interstellar relations for generations to come. Human patience wasn't weakness, wasn't passivity, wasn't an inability to act decisively when action was required. It was them being polite, and politeness, they had discovered, worked much better when everyone understood that it was a choice, not a limitation. The universe was a much more civilized place when civilization was backed by the clear understanding that some things were worth fighting for and that humans would fight very, very well when the time came. Through the chamber's vast windows, stars shone down on a galaxy where diplomacy flourished under the protection of those who had learned that sometimes the most peaceful outcome required demonstrating the alternatives to peace. The age of taking human patience for granted was over. The age of galactic cooperation under human leadership had begun. The end.